Welcome to the ANEW Body Insight podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogrammed Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. And Chantal Donnelly, physical therapist and author of Settled, How to Find Calm in a Stress-Inducing World. We follow our guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us.
Hello, and welcome to the ANEW Body Insight podcast. I am Chantal Donnelly, and I am here with my esteemed co-host, Dr. Supatra Tovar. Say hi, Supatra.
Hi, Supatra. Just kidding. Hi, everybody.
Today, we are super excited because we have David Moerlein on the show with us. Hey, David, good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We're going to tell you a little bit about David, and the rest of you are all going to be excited too. So during his 15 years at Google, David Moerlein managed hundreds of people across 10 global offices and was awarded numerous awards for coaching and management. David combines his academic background in science and business and focuses his work at the intersection of psychology, behavioral economics, business acumen, statistics, and operations to support highly productive teams and happy workers. His book, The Safety Effect, I've got my copy right here.
Yay!
Yay! So David's book, The Safety Effect, shares tools that you can implement, he has implemented over the years to help others create psychological safety for themselves and others. And we will get into what psychological safety is in a bit. You know, I think it's become very clear to most of us anyways, that work stress equals life stress. And we all know that stress in general plays a huge role in exacerbating disease and just creating unhappiness in general. And for that reason, we are truly, truly excited to have David on the show. I think David Moerlein has a unique take on how we can ameliorate workplace stress, which is really affecting a lot of people. And we wanted to share his knowledge with all of you. So again, thank you for being here, David. I guess we should probably also mention too that David and I are kind of sort of related. My husband's brother is married to David's sister. So there you have it, folks. We are sort of related.
I feel like you might have to draw a little diagram for that one, like as it pops up on the screen to like show the connection. Yes.
I think,
Exactly.
yeah, that might.
We'll have to put Kevin Bacon in there somewhere too.
Perfect.
That's a good idea.
So David, before we get into psychological safety, and maybe you can also calm us down because we just had a 4.7 earthquake right before we started this, so we're feeling a little physically unsafe and also psychologically unsafe. But before we get into that, we would love to hear how you ended up on this journey. You have a lot of different degrees. You have an undergraduate degree in ecology, a master's in biology, and I am with you on that. I have my BA. Is it a BA? Yeah, my BA in biology. You also have an MBA. So there is an eclectic mix of academic accomplishments here. Please tell us how this all kind of got woven together so that you are able to write this book on psychological safety.
Yeah, I'll call out, this is a question I've received many times, especially in job interviews. So most employers would look at that, especially early in my career, and they'd be like, this guy's a little flaky, he doesn't know what he wants to do. And it probably worked against me in many ways, and luckily at this point, probably less so. But it's something that I've always tended to follow my passions, and then I mix in a bit of practicality along the way. And I try to like do something that's practical in the mix of the passions. And so in my first two degrees, I followed my heart. So I've always been interested in how nature works, and then that intersection of how nature can impact humans. So for my research and my master's, I looked at my study was on the ability of indoor plants to remove particulate matter from indoor air. So you guys are in LA, lots of particulate matter. Anytime you can remove that from the air, it can reduce the incidence of things like asthma and other breathing challenges. And so mine was the only study after NASA at the time to look into that. Unfortunately, it was too realistic of an environment for, and so I ended up, it was inconclusive. But that was my path, is I wanted to find some way to connect nature to human health and then to provide benefit in a way that's mutually beneficial for the environment and us. Um, After I finished that second degree, though, I applied to probably 20 jobs, and I was either ghosted or rejected by all of them. So I got a temporary job and realized it was time to maybe focus a little bit more on the practical side of my passions, which I really have always enjoyed business as well, and decided to get my MBA. And then luckily I discovered Google. So Google appreciated the MBA, but they were also one of the unique employers that also recognized some of the value I could bring with the diverse perspective of biology. And I don't want to take us down a different path, but when I do want to share a little bit beyond just the education, because most people, when they see my experience, it might look goofy and disconnected. And when somebody sees somebody like me in my career at Google and then as an author, they might think that I had a linear path to where I was, where I am now, and that's very much not the case. So I went to 5 colleges. I dropped out of my first college and never intended to go back. Luckily, I did, and it led me down this path. But I founded a clothing company during my first master's with the goal of giving back, and I donated a good percentage of the profits to charities. I started a real estate investment firm while I was at Google, investment company, and then where we had residential properties. I started another clothing company while I was at Google, and then I went down this path of writing this book. I also wrote another book in undergrad about a bike trip that I took from Cincinnati to Jackson, Wyoming, just by myself, 1,800 miles. I throw all that out there because I didn't know where I would end up. I followed where I needed to be in that moment, and then that led me to a path of where I am today.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that, we also want to know the inspiration to write about psychological safety. Give us a picture of that.
Yeah, so about writing about psychological safety specifically, so writing the safety effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was fortunate during my time at Google. Google ran a study. It was called Project Aristotle. It was a little over a decade ago, and they researched 180 global teams across engineering and sales. And the hope was to find what drives the most effective teams. And some of the stuff that might pop up for us, or that if we were just brainstorming, we might think that tenure or seniority or a fancy school or working in the same office would all drive a better team environment and a more effective team. But in that study, they found that none of those had any statistical significance to team effectiveness. The number one driver was psychological safety. And so what I realized around that time was that what I was creating within my teams at Google, because I managed teams for 12 years, what I was creating within my teams was actually called psychological safety. And I had consistently been receiving positive feedback from those who were working with me, that I was creating spaces where they could speak up, share ideas, they could challenge me directly, they could take chances and take risks and fail, and all of that was okay. And so the combination of those two things, where I'm coming from a company who did some of the most influential research in the space, and that I had been fortunate enough to create psychological safety for 12 plus years at Google, I felt like I had something to bring to the world. And so I'm sharing some of the tools that others can implement for their teams within the book.
So fascinating. I've heard about that study that they did at Google, but it's kind of cool to hear it from your perspective, having been there for 15 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your responsibilities were at Google and what kind of went down when you were there?
Yeah. So I was originally brought into a role as an individual contributor role where I spent a couple of years doing data analysis and creating essentially pitch presentations in the storylines that we would then bring to Fortune 500 customers and around the advertising space. And then I was recruited into a manager role a couple years in, and I led sales teams for a little over 8 years. And that was working with as small as mom and pop shops, just trying to figure out what to do, like how can they bring in a few more customers, up through Fortune 100 companies, with substantial budgets and much different challenges than those mom and pop shops, all working with Google Ads. And then I transitioned, I took that experience into our enablement team and led global enablement teams for 4 years. So I was originally hired to develop a sales skills training for our SMB organization. So the small and medium sized companies that we were partnering with. So we created the first sales skills training for that group. And then expanded some of those trainings across our analysts and our operations teams as well. And so when I left Google, I was still working within that team.
Wow. That is wonderful. So, we did touch upon your book, The Safety Effect, and the reason why you wrote it. Give us a picture of what's actually in the book. What kinds of concepts do you bring forward?
Yeah. So I'll lead with just a brief preface, because when I was first starting to talk with others around what I plan to share, I have a good friend in Cincinnati who's a director at the YMCA, and she does some similar type of work. And I sat down to coffee with her, and I shared what I was planning to write, and she is like, "Well, you can't write a framework that will create psychological safety. It's not possible." And actually, I took that to heart. And when in the framing of everything that I put on the pages, because I don't intend any of it to dictate, I intend it to be to provide options that people can then try what feels genuine for them to implement for themselves, within their team, and across their organization. So I deliberately structured it in that way, and was conscious to not say this is going to work for everybody, but just do what feels genuine to you. I started with ourselves because that's where we have the most control. And then I took it to our team, where we can have influence, but we can't control what those, but we can likely influence what is happening within our team. And then I started to talk about how can you bring it to your organization. And for most of us, especially at a larger company, we likely can't change the organization. We can't change the culture. We can't change what leadership is doing. Even if we are within that leadership role for the CEO, the CMO, like, we can't change everything quickly. But we can start to make slight inroads into understanding what's happening within our culture that can then allow us on our team level and for us as individuals to start to bring psychological safety to life, or to make changes that can hopefully ultimately change the overall culture of the organization. But the framing is starting with us, where we have the most control, and then going to the place of the organization. And then I invite practice so that we can create habits around it. So there are 7 to 12 tools that you could bring out for your teams and for yourself. And if you would begin to practice those and deliberately practice them and continue to iterate, I expect, just like I experienced, that you'd be able to create psychological safety for yourself and your team.
Yeah, it's a lot like stress. When I started writing about stress, it was like it's individual for everybody, right? Which is what you were saying here with psychological safety. And you can't control other people. So you have to start with yourself. And then you find ways in which you can change your environment. Maybe not the people in the environment, but you can change the environment. So it's funny, not surprising that there's a parallel there. It's interesting, in the book, you talk a lot about the benefits of psychological safety. And you mentioned before what psychological safety is, but maybe if you could give us the more standard definition for our listeners so that they really understand. You had mentioned, helping people feel like they could talk to you, and even though there's a hierarchy, not making people feel like they have to kowtow to what you're saying if you're in the higher position. But maybe there's another definition that you could give so people really get a solid understanding. And also, can you talk to us about why it is you mentioned in your book that psychological safety leads to team success? Because
Yeah.
I think that's really where companies start to their ears perk up and they want to know more about psychological safety, which ultimately
Yeah.
helps their employees as well as their companies.
I, just so you know, I'm jotting down because I think there were maybe a couple questions in there. I just want to make sure I get to each of them.
Sorry,
So,
Patra and I have a tendency to throw a lot of questions all at once at people.
all good.
Sorry.
No, all good. No need to apologize. So I heard what is psychological safety and how do we define that and how does it relate to hierarchy? And did I hear that one in there as well?
Well,
Um,
I think you had mentioned hierarchy before, so just in the definition, how does it relate to hierarchy? Yeah.
yeah. And I feel like there was one other one.
Why is it that psychological safety improves team success?
Okay, great. Um, Thank you for taking the time
There
to
will
do
be a quiz at the end.
perfect. And actually, I'll call out. So if I didn't feel safe with you, I probably wouldn't have taken the time to follow up with those questions. I would have just tried to jump in and remember and do the best I could because I wouldn't have felt comfortable pausing to ask the questions. So I'll call it out. So psychological safety is that feeling that we have when we feel comfortable speaking up and sharing our ideas and trying new things without fear of judgment or repercussion. And it can show up in a variety of different ways, but I tend to think of two different categories where I think it highlights pretty well for me. One is when I'm experiencing a challenge. So let's say I am a salesperson and I have a CEO meeting coming up, and I'm really nervous about it. In a psychologically safe environment, I could go and talk to my manager, or I could talk to my teammates, or talk to both, and say, I'm feeling really anxious here. And they could take the time to ask some questions to uncover what is it that's making me feel uncomfortable, and then create the space for me to practice in a way that would allow me to improve and show up better for that CEO. And the results are great because I feel supported. I'm more likely to show up better in the meeting. I'm more likely to actually want to stay in my role because I'm enjoying that growth that I'm experiencing. The CEO is probably going to have a better experience because I'm going to show up better, and hopefully they will then be more inclined to join in with what we're offering from our company. And our team then benefits because assuming that all plays out, you're more likely to hit your targets. And so that kind of goes to your last piece of like, how does that improve team success? When we are able to speak up and share our concerns and discuss challenges openly, we are more likely to find outcomes proactively that are better than we would have found otherwise. And then there's a flip side to it. So if I kick butt at something and I know I do really, really well, and then I can unapologetically share that with those around me. And it's not about bragging. It's not about saying, hey, like, look at how great I am. It's about how can we lift those around us to also be great. And so, yes, it feels good to share our successes and the things that we're doing well, but the intent behind this when there's psychological safety is to have that positive feeling, but then to share it with others so they can also feel it. And in both of those cases, what happens is the team performs better, and you're more likely to achieve the goals that you've set out for yourself, and ultimately the organization is more likely to thrive.
That all makes
Wow.
perfect sense.
And actually, and
Totally.
I'll call out the hierarchy piece as well because when we think about leadership, uh, at least in my experience, it can sometimes be scary to challenge or to pursue something with a leader who maybe is not receptive to it. But when we start to, and this is not universally true, but it is more true in my experience than not, when we start to tie the conversation back into what they care about most, they're more likely to be receptive. So I'll get back to the sales side. If my sales leader cares about revenue growth or customer acquisition, then if I have this conversation around psychological safety of if we are able to create this environment and genuinely be able to speak up and share our ideas, and as a result, we're going to get more money and we're going to acquire more customers, they're more likely to be receptive to it. The same is true across industry. So I don't know if you're a physician and you, or a physical therapist, I should say, and you, the the intent is to have be able to support more people with better outcomes, then you might be more inclined, if you feel psychologically safe, to speak up and share where you feel like you are being challenged or you're not able to support your patients, and other physical therapists then can come help you. Or if you're really good at something, you can go and share it with them. It shows up in every industry, and it shows up across the hierarchy, up and down, and across the breadth of the company, across the team as well. It plays the same way.
Wow. You know, I can name several psychologically unsafe places that I have worked at, and can really see how the leaders would have benefited for this kind of training, you know. And what I'm wondering is, I'm imagining trying to bring this training into some of these organizations and getting a lot of, you know, roadblocks and, you know, with these difficult personalities. You know, just tell me, how can you promote the implementation of something like this within a corporation that may suffer from that kind of leadership, you know, the creation of that unsafe environment? How do you bring psychological safety as a topic and as a goal for the organization with someone who might be roadblocking that?
Yeah. Um, there are two things that pop in my head related to this. One is thinking of the leadership as human. Uh, and the second is making it bite-sized. It's more tactical and practical. But I'll start with the first piece, because I think it's really easy, just like it's easy for a leader without much context to provide judgment to an individual on a team and to see a mistake from somebody and maybe judge that in a way that they apply it to the person as a whole instead of it being around the situation. It's easy for individuals, and I'll speak for myself, but I've seen it within Google many times, to also make assumptions around leadership. So I'll call out leadership are also very human, and they also want psychological safety. So inherently, this goes back to the beginning of time. As humans, we want to feel safe. We've always wanted physical safety, and we've always needed psychological safety as well. And so just as much as the three of us need safety, that leader also needs safety. And so there is something underlying how they are behaving. And oftentimes it can be around some type of fear. And so when I think about a leader who is showing up in a way that doesn't appear to be psychologically safe, and they're not embracing a conversation around how they can improve, that conversation requires some vulnerability. It's probably pretty scary to invite that type of feedback. And so I think it's starting with treating them as human and recognizing that there's probably something underlying what they're feeling as well, and exploring that and getting to the base of it. It might be difficult to get there, but maybe you're not the person to do it, but maybe there's somebody else within the organization that would be capable of sitting down with them and uncovering what they're experiencing. So I think I would start there, and then, as much as we can, have that conversation to address their fear and concern, in addition to tying it back to what they care about, what they're compensated on. So that kind of gets to a tactical piece within there. And then the other is around, for training specifically. Training's tough. Training takes time, and the incremental value added by training is difficult to assess, if not impossible. I'm actually in a conversation with a Fortune 500 company right now, and they just asked me a question around how do we determine if training is actually working or not. And it's a whole other path, but it's very difficult to prove that training is working. So when I think about bringing training into a company, I think about it being there are two criteria. One is it needs to be bite-sized. So in the training that I've created recently, they're 1 hour long. So you dedicate 1 hour, and then the intent is to promote practice. What you learn in that session most times is almost completely useless. It's a way of phrasing it. But we lose 90% of what we learn in the first week if we don't practice it. It's a, I don't know, it might be an overstatement to say it's a fact, but there's strong evidence to support that if we don't practice what we learn, it's not very helpful to us. So when I think about bringing it to a leader, I think about it being bite-sized. So can they just show up and then learn something new, a single skill, and then they go practice that immediately afterwards with their team. And then it has to have a direct applicability to how their teams are compensated so that they have interest in bringing that to their teams.
Yeah. I can imagine that the fear can be ameliorated with the desire to have their product or whatever their business is centered around thriving, and them really kind of getting that information, like, because this environment is not psychologically safe, that's one of the main reasons why you're not seeing the numbers that you're seeing. So perhaps that can be an incentive for them. And then I think, that opens up that possibility for them to have a little self-reflection on the type of environment that they're promoting or that they're creating. And especially when it's done in a kind and compassionate way, where, you're really like acknowledging that they're human and that we all really want and need this, then that helps to lower down their defense and allows them to then be receptive to improving their company. This is all super fascinating, and I think so many people need this training in any organization that they're involved in, even if it's something small with just a few employees. Right now, we're out of time for this half of this podcast interview, but we will be coming back for the second half of this amazing interview with author and corporate whisperer. And please forgive me if I say your name wrong. Please say your last name again for me so I say it right.
Moerlein.
Moerlein, okay. So we will be back with corporate whisperer David Moerlein. Thank you so much for joining us. Wow! Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Body Insight podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Body Insight podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.